All right, welcome to the Chapter 10 lecture on renewable resources. So our objectives today are to distinguish between renewable and non-renewable energy sources, to recognize the current contribution of renewables to global energy use and geographic constraints on renewables. We're going to be able to identify which industries are best at using waste to produce energy and factors to burning waste to produce energy, including crop residues. We'll be able to list processes used in the production of energy from biomass, describe environmental issues related to each type of a renewable energy source, contrast active and passive solar energy systems, describe how wind, geothermal, and tidal energy are used to produce electricity, and recognize the role of energy conservation in shifting to a sustainable energy future. So, our current status of renewable energy is that renewable sources supply about 13.5% of the world's energy. And the price of energy from renewable sources is competitive with fossil fuel sources now. Response to climate change is stimulating investment in renewable energy. And that renewable energy sources that are growing are biomass conversion, hydroelectric power, solar, wind, geothermal energy, and also tidal power. All right. So some studies suggest that renewable energy sources could provide about half of the world's energy needs by 2050, which would be a substantial change from the 13.5 that they produce now. Of that 13.5% that makes up global energy use from renewable sources, biomass and waste are the leading source of renewable energy here. Solar, wind, and geothermal contribute about 2%, and hydroelectric another 2.5%. So what is biomass conversion? Well, all biomass is produced by green plants that convert sunlight energy into plant material through photosynthesis, right? That's the ultimate source of biological energy on our planet. And that biomass can move up through the food chain, of course. You remember only 10% of the energy in each trophic level makes its way up the food chain. Now, biomass fulfilled almost all of our species' energy needs prior to the Industrial Revolution. And it's still the predominant form of energy used by people in developing countries today. The major types of biomass are fuel wood, municipal and industrial waste, agricultural crop residues, and crop residues would be things like after corn is harvested, the corn stalks that are left in the field, right? Those are residual agricultural crops that aren't used. They don't have a purpose, or at least not a very profitable one. And they can be used along with animal waste to generate energy and energy plantations. So sometimes crops are grown specifically for the purpose of energy production rather than food. So in less developed countries, fuel wood has been a major energy source for centuries, and it's the primary energy source for about 30% of the world's population. Wood smoke on a large scale is a significant air pollutant. Now, many people also use wood as fuel for cooking. They can cook over open fires, which is less efficient use of that energy than using a stove that can reduce the need for fuel, reduce the time and money needed to obtain wood, and reduce air pollution. So even just finding ways to use firewood more efficiently can make a big difference. Here's an example of an open cooking fire and a more efficient stove type. Waste is another major source of biomass and other burnable materials produced by society. And the burning of municipal solid waste to produce energy only makes economic sense when we consider the cost of waste disposal. So when the cost of disposal of waste is high, like trash, that's when burning that garbage and harvesting energy from that heat that's released can become an economical process. Crop residues and animal waste. So materials left over after the harvest of a crop, for example, straw and corn stalks, these can be used to produce biomass fuel. Animal dung can also be dried and burned or processed in anaerobic digesters to provide a burnable gas. Negative impacts of using crop residues and animal wastes are that removing those crop residues reduces the supply of organic matter from the soil. So you can't constantly take everything that a field produces and expect it to continue to be productive and healthy, right? Removing crop residues in the field exposes the soil to erosion, which is how we ended up with the Dust Bowl, right? Okay, energy plantations. Many crops, including sugar beets, sugar cane, corn, grains, kelp, and palm oil, can be grown for the express purpose of energy production. And two factors determine whether a crop is suitable for energy use. Good energy crops have a very high yield of dry material per unit of land. And the amount of energy that can be produced from a biomass crop must be more than the amount of energy required to grow that crop. There are several different technologies capable of converting biomass into energy. We have direct combustion, so burning biomass in fires to cook food or heat homes. We also have biofuels production, so a fermentation that converts the plant sugars to ethanol, which can be used as an energy source. And there's ethanol added to gasoline that we put in our cars, right? Anaerobic digestion is when green, wet biomass and animal waste are broken down by anaerobic bacteria and produce methane gas and carbon dioxide. And lastly, pyrolysis. This is a controlled combustion process that converts biomass to a more useful fuel, like charcoal or burnable gases and liquids. Biocrude. So, at the University of Michigan, student researchers have been working to improve production of biocrude energy from algae. I'll see if I can get this link to work. Oops. Guess not. I'll put the link up for you guys to watch yourselves. I'm a little distant from my router at the moment. But watch the video. Make sure you understand how students here in Michigan are working to do biofuels production using algae as the biomass source to produce an energy fuel source, biocrude. It's pretty slick. All right, environmental issues relating to biomass use for energy. Habitat and biodiversity loss. So 1.3 billion people cannot obtain wood, or they have to harvest it faster than it will grow. So just because people are using wood as an energy source doesn't mean it's sustainable, right? Much forest has been destroyed in Asia and Africa, and desertification has increased in these regions. Desertification is when human changes to the habitat, like harvesting biomass at an unsustainable fashion, it can actually leave an area subject to pressures like heat and drying out and not being able to retain moisture in such a way that it can actually form deserts. So deserts are growing, whereas forests are shrinking on a global scale. Air pollution is another problem. So burning wood produces air pollution. Smoke, particulates, carbon monoxide, and hydrocarbons all contribute to poor health. Some other environmental issues related to biomass use for energy are climate change. So burning biomass releases CO2 into the atmosphere. And the removal of carbon dioxide by plants is a long-term process, right? So if we're removing trees from forests faster than they're being replaced, we're missing out on this temporary carbon sink that the trees function as. Also, food production. Using crops to provide energy reduces the amount of land available for food production. Millions of people don't have enough to eat. So there's some ethical concerns here. And the use of crop residues and animal manure for energy diverts them from use as fertilizer. All right, let's shift gears and talk about hydroelectric power next. Hydroelectric power is created when the kinetic energy of flowing water is converted to electrical energy. So damming a river and storing water in a reservoir is the most common method for generating electricity. Water released from the reservoir flows through a turbine, and that movement of the turbine produces the electricity. The potential for developing hydroelectric power is best in mountainous regions and in large river valleys. So places where there's a change in elevation of the water, so it should have a lot of force, or where the mass of water is great, also increasing the force, right? Okay, hydroelectric power. It currently supplies about 16% of the world's electricity. And in South and Central America, 56% of electricity comes from hydroelectric power. In the Northern Hemisphere, Norway gets almost all of its electricity and nearly 60% of its energy needs from hydroelectric power, which is remarkable. And here's some examples of dams. So here's one in Japan. And the power plant. So we see the water comes in through the intake, goes into the penstock, spins the turbine, and then it's released out into the river. As the turbine spins, that operates this generator and produces electricity, which can then be transferred long distance to where it's needed by the power lines. Some environmental issues that go along with hydroelectric power are that they can create a loss of farmland or forested land due to flooding. In order to have a dam, you have to create a lake, right? And that means that something has to be lost to make room for that lake. Like communities have to relocate. It can have big impacts on fish migration patterns. And this has been huge for things like salmon that need to be able to migrate upstream to reach their natal streams in order to reproduce. And if we have dams in the way, that's an impenetrable barrier, and the salmon can't reproduce. Trapping of silt fills in the reservoir and stops the flow of nutrients downstream. And also, mercury and heavy metals can accumulate in that silt that builds up on the lake side of the dam, like on this side. We can have buildup of heavy metals or contaminants, toxins. The Kalamazoo River in southeastern Michigan has a series of dams that have been poorly maintained. And they are holding back PCBs that are laden in the sediments there. So that's an environmental concern that hopefully we don't have to deal with, but a dam's not going to last forever, right? I don't know if any work has been done since I was down there to improve the quality and stability of those dams or not. Let's hope so. All right, solar energy. So daily energy from the sun is 600 times greater than all the energy produced each day by all the other sources. Major problems with solar energy are its intermittent and diffuse nature. So we currently utilize solar energy in 3 ways. The first is in passive heating. The sun's energy is converted directly to heat and used at a collection site. So this would be like using the sun to illuminate the interior of buildings is also a passive process, right? Like a skylight. An active heating system. This is where the sun's energy is converted into heat but transported somewhere else to be used. And lastly, solar energy is also transformed into electrical energy. I think this is what we normally think of when we say the word or hear the word solar energy. But all three are important. In a passive system, light energy is transformed to heat when it's absorbed by a surface. Buildings designed for passive solar heating in the northern hemisphere usually have large south-facing windows. And floors and walls made of materials that absorb and store the sun's heat during the day slowly release heat at night when it's needed most. This is a feature called direct gain. Here's some examples of passive solar designs. We see huge windows all facing south. And in an active solar design, here comes the energy from the sun is collected by solar collector panels, and then that energy gets transferred to heated water. So there's a energy transfer here to the heated water. That hot water gets pumped around to where it can be used to do things like heat the schoolroom. Solar generated electricity. Solar energy can generate electricity in two different ways. The sun's energy can be used to create steam and drive a turbine. Currently, the most successful design is the parabolic trough, which heats oil in pipes. The heat is transferred to water to make steam and run a turbine. Second are photovoltaic cells, and these generate electricity directly. Generating electricity from coal and nuclear power is rising, while electricity from photovoltaics is now less expensive in some places than electricity from the grid. In recent years, the amount of PV power installed worldwide has been increasing dramatically. We've reached the tipping point where photovoltaic, like solar panels, are cost effective now. So we should hopefully see this dramatic increase continue, and they should become more common. All right, and some examples of different technology. This picture on the left is a solar powered tower. It uses mirrors to focus sunlight at a central point, and that raises the temperature and allows for the production of steam. These parabolic troughs transfer heat to water and then converts it to steam. Now, photovoltaic solar cells are a sandwich of materials that contain a semiconductor that releases electrons when light's absorbed. The released electron flows from one place to another, and thus a solar cell can convert sun's energy directly to electricity. All right, photovoltaics, the original semiconductor material used in solar cells was silicon, and it's still the most widely used material today. New varieties of semiconductors have been invented that are beginning to be used in solar cells, particularly in thin film technology. Thin film technology has made it possible to build solar cells right into roof shingles and tiles, building facades, and the glazing for skylights and atria. Huge photovoltaic arrays are being constructed by utility companies to produce electricity. Worldwide, during 2019, about 98,000 megawatts of photovoltaics were installed, an increase of 20% over 2018. Some environmental issues with solar energy are that it's renewable and it has minimal environmental impact. However, the manufacture of silicon and other materials to make up the units requires a large amount of energy. Thermal and photovoltaic power plants require large amounts of land to position mirrors and solar collectors. Installation of photovoltaics or water heating systems on buildings does not require additional space and is often incorporated into the design of the building. Here's some examples of photovoltaic cells on these look residential to me. And then these are more industrial solar farms. All right, wind. For a century, wind has been used to move ships, grind grains, pump water, and do other forms of work. And in recent times, wind has been used to generate electricity. In 2008, the Department of Energy published a report stating that it was technically feasible to generate 20% of the electricity in the U.S. from wind by 2030. Because winds are variable, they must be coupled with other more reliable sources of energy. You wouldn't want your entire energy grid to be dependent on wind, because then what happens on days with very little wind, right? Since the technology used to generate electricity from wind is easy to install, sizable increases in capacity occur each year. In 2019, there were about 622,000 megawatts of installed capacity worldwide. That was an increase of 10.5% over 2018. And the United States, Germany, and China constitute about 60% of the installed capacity. The total electrical energy produced by wind today is still only 2% of the total wind worldwide energy consumption. Some other downsides are that the moving blades of a wind farm are hazardous to birds and bats. Newer designs have a slower moving rotor that many birds, such as the golden eagle, find easier to avoid. One study done in Norway found that painting one of the blades of a wind turbine black reduced bird deaths by 70%. It makes them more visible. Some people consider the sight of a large number of wind generators to be visual pollution. All right, geothermal energy. In geologically active areas, hot magma moves to the surface and heats water. The hot water can heat buildings or generate electricity through a steam turbine. Wells are drilled to obtain steam trapped underground, and the steam powers the electrical generators. The U.S. produces about 25% of the world's geothermal energy. However, geothermally produced electricity is less than 1% of our total energy consumption in the U.S. Heat pumps can be used in areas that are not geologically active, and the heat pump extracts heat from the earth and deposits it inside a building. Steam often contains hydrogen sulfide gas. Nasty stuff. It smells like rotten eggs, minerals and steam from the pipes and equipment, and the minerals are toxic to fish. There are a few environmental issues with heat pumps, needless to say. All right, tidal power. Certain coastal regions experience higher tides than others. To produce practical amounts of power, a difference between high and low tides of at least 5 meters is required. A dam or barrage is built across a tidal bay or estuary. And the number of suitable sites for tidal power generation are very small. The changing tides create strong ocean currents in some locations, and the wind-like turbine machines are placed on the seafloor. Only one such system is in operation, and it's north of Scotland. All right, some environmental issues to tidal power is barriers and turbines will affect the migration of salmon and other marine species. All right, and here are some critical thinking questions that I expect you to pause this video and take the time to answer thoughtfully on your PowerPoints. Which of the renewable energy sources do you think would be the best for the Tri-Cities area to invest in, and why? Okay, next question. What are the costs and benefits associated with this renewable? All right, and let's talk for a bit here about energy conservation. Energy conservation can be thought of as a source of energy since it reduces the energy demands and thus makes it easier to meet future energy needs. Many cultural or lifestyle factors have been shaped by the availability of low-cost energy. Having large homes, outdoor lighting, and large lawns. If the cost of energy were higher, people would be likely to make different choices about what's essential, and they would evaluate energy efficiency much more carefully. There's typically a relationship between the cost of an item and its energy efficiency. Often, poorly designed, energy inefficient buildings and machines can be produced cheaply and inexpensively. The short-term cost, the purchase price, is low, but the long-term cost for upkeep and energy utilization is high. The cost of more efficient buildings and machines is also higher, but the difference in initial price is made up by savings in energy cost over several years. This is known as the payback period. The US and Canada have about twice the per capita energy consumption than other countries with similar economic status. So Canadian and American citizens use about twice the energy of citizens in, say, Australia or France. Many conservation techniques are relatively simple and highly cost-effective. LED bulbs use about 20% of the energy and last 25 times longer than incandescent bulbs. You can buy like major appliances come with these energy guides where they give you an estimate of how efficient is this model. It would cost you $55 a year to run this model, whatever it is, and only $23 a year to run this one. And then there's usually this ranking, like a slide bar where they'll rank how energy efficient your model of appliances relative to others that are on the market today. And you'll remember from previous lectures that government incentives can affect citizen behavior, right? So the shift to efficient use of energy needs encouragement. Most U.S. government incentives provide economic rewards in the form of tax incentives or impose penalties. Higher fuel economy standards for automobiles and trucks. Tax incentives for those who update appliances. In 2014, we phased out incandescent light bulbs, higher energy efficiency standards for appliances, investment in more efficient electricity distributions, and improvement in high-speed rail transportation. All right, some more critical thinking questions for you here. Pause your video so you have time to think and write down your thoughts in your PowerPoint. First of all, energy conservation is one way to decrease our dependence on fossil fuels. What are some things you already do at home or work or school to reduce your energy consumption? Okay, and what is one other change you'd be willing to make to further reduce your energy consumption? So, in summary, fuel wood is the major source of energy in less developed countries. Biomass can be burned to provide heat or electricity, or converted to alcohol, or used to generate methane. Hydroelectric power may be increased significantly, but it might displace some people and communities. Solar energy can be collected and is used in either passive or active systems and can also generate electricity. Geothermal and tidal applications are very limited by geographic regions, locations, and wind power may be used to generate electricity, but it requires wide open spaces and a large number of wind generators. Each conservation strategy can reduce energy demands without noticeably changing standards of living. All right, and that's it for the Chapter 10 lecture. As always, please keep track of any questions you have so that we can discuss them in office hours or at class. All right?